Hey everyone, welcome to my very first vlog, and I thought I'd start with some comfort food, to get comfortable. Tonight's dinner is going to be a baked pasta dish, super comforting, quickish, and full of flavor. So tonight I'm making one of my favorite easy comfort meals, spicy baked pasta with ground chicken in a homemade tomato sauce, more like a fake marinara. And of course, I have to add lots of jhal, which is the Bengali equivalent of spicy heat, because I can't help it. I love spicy food. So let's get started. First things first, I'm boiling a big pot of water for the elbow pasta. Macaroni's more curvy, low maintenance cousin. I'm adding a good amount of salt to the water. Don't be shy with the salt because the pasta only absorbs a little and we want it to taste like something, not meh. I'm covering the pot so it can come to a rolling boil really fast and also save on energy. Why waste energy, right? And while that's happening, I'll get the sauce ingredients ready. I've got some onion and I won't need the whole thing. I have a piece of ginger and a clove of garlic. Most of these I keep frozen so they're always handy. Total time saver. And I'll grab some frozen red peppers too. Here's a quick tip, and maybe you already know this, but when peeling ginger, skip the peeler. It takes off half the ginger, but if you use the back of a spoon instead, just the skin comes off and you don't waste the good stuff. I also keep this little plastic container to collect all the scraps because it goes straight into my compost after. Less mess later, and it makes me feel good because I'm helping the environment. Now the red peppers. Although I love the flavor, but too much can mess with my stomach, so I'm using just a little. Onto the onion. I'm slicing it medium thick, nothing fancy. And look, our water is boiling. So pasta time. I'm cooking the pasta for about 6 minutes, al dente-ish. But since this is going into the oven, I actually don't mind if it ends up being a little undercooked. Works out fine in the end. Pasta is done. Now let's make the sauce. I've added some olive oil to a saucepan and heating it over medium. In go the onions first. And I'm grating in the ginger and garlic right away. I don't bother browning the onions, just want them soft and flavorful. Doing everything together makes it super quick and stress-free. I can already smell that ginger and garlic magic. Time for a bit of salt and pepper, just adding basic spices. Next, the red peppers go in. They're still chilly, so I've turned up the heat a little to keep things cooking nicely. Now, the star of tonight's show is ground chicken. It's been years since I cooked any kind of meat at home. At some point, I just couldn't bring myself to handle it. But today I'm feeling brave and I'm not chickening out. I'm adding my own spice blend, lots of cinnamon powder, and a generous spoon, okay, handful of chili powder. I never measure. I just go with my gut and my taste buds. I'll break up the chicken and let it brown slightly. And while that's doing its thing, I've preheated the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Time for the tomato sauce. I'm keeping it simple with canned tomato sauce, no fancy jars today, because I like to add my own veggies and spices anyway. I'm tossing in a bit of salt and some water to loosen it up. Since it's going into the oven, we don't want it to dry out into oven-dried tomato. I'll let that simmer for about 12 to 13 minutes while I prep the pasta. I'll layer the pasta into a baking dish. I'll ladle on the sauce, and very generously, and it's so nice and saucy, just the way I like it. I have some leftover pasta and sauce that I'll just freeze for later because honestly, I don't want to end up eating pasta for the rest of the week. Cheese time. I love cheese, but dare not eat it too often. One is for the fat, of course, and depending on the day, it can give me a tummy ache. So I'm using a spicy cheddar with habanero, not as fiery as I'd like, but better than plain old cheddar. Making sure there's cheese in every corner because nobody likes a cheeseless bite. Then a generous sprinkle of panko breadcrumbs for crunch. My son used to love this, but now that he's all into clean and healthy eating and micronutrients, I'm not sure he'd approve of the extra calories. For the final touches, I'm adding more black pepper and my homemade chili flakes. I got the chili flakes made in Kolkata actually. They're not super hot, but so full of smoky flavor. I bring them back every time I visit and guard them like treasure. Now, into the oven it goes. Baking at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes, and then I'll crank it up to 450 Fahrenheit for 10 minutes more to get that cheese beautifully browned and the crust crunchy. I like it a little overdone because it just adds to the crispy crust. And ta-da, here it is. Here is the final result. Beautifully golden and crispy, just how I like it. I'll let it stand for a couple of minutes before cutting into it. Can you hear that crunch? That's the sound of happiness. And now that this was successful, let me share a little something. About 5 years ago, I actually stopped cooking. Between working full-time and running my business, I barely had time to breathe, let alone cook a proper meal. Can you believe it? I used to teach Indian cooking classes. I know, right? Cooking was such a big part of my life when I moved to Canada over 25 years ago, and somewhere along the way, I let it go. But now, drumroll please, I've just retired and I finally have time again. Time to slow down, chop some onions without crying too much, and get back to doing what I used to love. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks so much for hanging out with me in the kitchen today. It feels really good to be cooking again. Let me know in the comments, what's a dish that brings you comfort? And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I'd love to have you here for more. See you next time. Take care.